Laut of Singapore, who are they? They are in our history textbooks, as everyone would know when Raffles was here in our official narrative. The island was empty and he saw 30 Orang Laut, I believe that's the official number. Of course, we know there are a lot of holes in that narrative which has officially been debunked, I think, in the bicentennial report or bicentennial study in 2019. But regardless, hello everyone, welcome to episode 71. Today I am delighted because we will be having Firdaus from Orang Laut SG, and he will be educating us on who exactly are the Orang Laut, what does he and his organization, his movement stand for, if you can call it that. And I am quite excited to actually learn from him because I know very little about his organization and the narratives that they are trying to challenge. Hi, Firdaus.
Hello. Hi. Hi.
Can you hear me well?
I can. Can you
All
hear me? All
right.
good?
Yes. First of all, thank you for doing this. You are very game to do it, so I'm very delighted and honored. So let's get to it, right? So, and by way of introducing yourself as well, what is Orang Laut SG about? Who are the Orang Laut? And what is your personal background? What's your relations to the community of Orang Laut in Singapore? If you could explain.
Thank you for the questions. That's a lot of questions. Where do I start? Maybe just introduce who I am. My name is Firdaus. So, and my organization is Orang Laut SG. Maybe just focusing on who I am as a person. I am a fourth generation Orang Laut, Orang Pulau descendant. My grandparents actually used to live on Pulau Semakau before they were asked to live in 1977. So, who are the Orang Laut? I cannot speak on behalf of every Orang Laut tribes in Singapore, but I think it comprises of different groups. So we have the Orang Kalang, we have the Orang Selat, which is based in Malaysia as of now. So currently, and they're one of the 18 groups of Orang Asli, and we also have the Orang Gelam and Orang Selita as well. Sorry, I mentioned Selita. So the Orang Selat are basically the southern people, right? People of the south, basically. Selat means south, and also, just a caveat, I'm not an anthropologist, I'm not a historian, so this is me sharing with you guys about what I care about because of my heritage. So these Orang Salat, some of them has resettled at the southern islands, and from then they were known as Orang Pulau, which my family is currently identifying themselves as a former Orang Pulau actually, which means islanders.
Okay, so can I ask, Firdaus, is it a subset of Malays or is it separate from Malays? How do Orang Pulau or Orang Laut see themselves?
That's a really good question because the thing is, this is about identity, right?
Yeah.
So, the Nusantara is a very wide one, and I spoke to a couple of the Orang Pulau community in Singapore, and they refer to themselves as Malays, primarily Malays, who have coastal community livelihoods, from the coastal communities rather. And interestingly, I've spoken to people of the other parts of Nusantara, like Orang Bajau as well, and they call themselves the Bajau people, the Orang Bajau. So they're not Malays, they're the Bajauans. So actually, I think it's really interesting about identity as well. But in Singapore, we are primarily Malays. We are of the Malay community, and there's also different groups and tribes of the sukus, basically the different tribes. So they have currently in Indonesia the Orang Suku Laut, which are still seafarers, and recently with I think Dr. Cynthia Chow, we did a visitation to Bintan and visited one of the tribes in Bintan, the Orang Suku Laut, and interestingly, they refer to themselves as Orang Suku Laut and not of a race. Yeah.
Okay. So what's this distinctive if the Orang Laut in Singapore identify themselves as Malays, right? So it's a subset of Malays, right? So what's distinctive about the Orang Laut that separates themselves from other Malays, I suppose?
Okay. I cannot say on behalf of all the Orang Laut communities because we have different tribes, but the Orang Pulau themselves, they refer themselves as the Orang Pulau, and because of where they were situated. And in terms of their livelihoods and the kind of beliefs that they have, the traditions that they adhere to back then. I think Orang Pulau identify themselves as islanders, basically. Even when they moved to Singapore, they still had a very strong community where they talk about, past lives, or rather like the times on the island, and looking into these communities, right? They bonded through displacement, actually, because when they were displaced, they actually moved to different parts of Singapore. So they actually moved mostly at Teluk Blangah area, different parts of Teluk Blangah, and the Orang Pulau community actually would identify themselves based on the language, the way they talk. I live in Teluk Blangah since I was born, actually, and I moved to Jurong till 10 years, I think at the age of 10.
Oh, so you moved to Jurong.
Yeah, I moved to Jurong.
I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why Teluk Blangah specifically? Why did many Orang Pulau go there?
Okay, so the thing is, when they were asked to move to Singapore, right, they were given a few places to move to. Most of places with rented flats, because of the income group they were supposedly in. And one of them was actually Teluk Blangah. We have West Coast, we have Pandan Gardens as well. And most of them chose Teluk Blangah because really near West Coast Park. That's where they actually dock their boats. If you go to West Coast Park today, which is Pasir Panjang, you can actually see the boats there. And because of the arrangement back then with the then MP Mr. Othman Wok, they actually got the rights to park their boats there. So they could actually take a bus, travel. They wanted to live near the coastal areas, and Teluk Blangah was one of them. And I think I've also spoken to a few people from the Brani side, Pulau Brani, and they mentioned that it's because from Teluk Blangah, which is Teluk Blangah Crescent specifically, you can actually see Pulau Brani, which is very near.
Okay. Yeah. So obviously from the name itself, the sea is an important part of the tribe's existence, right? So is there still that connection today, even after urbanization and modernization? So for someone like yourself, fourth generation, so maybe a bit far removed from the past, is there still that connection there?
For myself, definitely yes, because of my grandfather. When he was asked to move, to mainland in 1977, my grandparents were actually the last one to leave. So they would go back to the island. They moved the entire family of 12 actually. They had 10 children, moved to a one-room flat. And my grandfather said, you know what, the city's air is not for him. He want to go back to where he can actually make a livelihood. So he went back at sea. He stayed on Pulau Semakau, even though everything was left deserted. So because of that, because of his little defiance, I got to visit him, and he brought me to the islands. So I grew up visiting Pulau Semakau a lot, and there's other southern islands. And before it was fully blocked off to be turned into a landfill. And because of that, I grew this connection with the sea. And my brothers as well, he still works at sea because he loves fishing, and all of this because of like our upbringing. There are still a small community of individuals who are going out there fishing. They still have boats there. This number is depleting because the Orang Lama, the old folks are dying off, right? And when they die off, a lot of these individuals go away with them. Meaning when they were given the rights to actually dock their boats, a lot of these issues came about as well because the rights die off with them, so they don't have the rights to park boats anymore.
So that one was ad hoc, or it was on a gentleman's agreement by Othman Wo, or what was it? Because it's not codified or it's not in contract.
To what I know, it was more of a verbal agreement.
Right.
But of course, later on they were asked to make it official, so they actually go through the proper routes with MPA to get a license, and the entire process came about. I mean, in Singapore, right, so licensing will have anyway. But I think based on the different consensus we've gotten from the community, says that if someone dies off, and for example, my uncle died off, like I think he passed on 2 years ago, and I think we wanted to have the license to be passed down to another family member, but we are not allowed to. So I think it's more of like making sure that we are still able to have access to sea. And if it's not going to be West Coast Park, where is it? But as much as we know there will be alternatives, we still want to retain West Coast Park because it was really important to the community, because a lot of people who are still going out at sea, and it become a little little space for them to make their maritime craft. And I think West Coast Park is one of the highly important places for the community, because a lot of community members will still go out there, wait for their loved ones to go at sea, to wait for them to gather the catch from their boo-boos and all that. So it's a very important space for the community.
How big is this community?
I cannot quantify it in numbers, but I think looking into active community members, if you look into the boats, they are scattered across West Coast Park, right? The small little segment there. It used to be an entire beach. Right now, it has been turned into water breakers. And we have a small area, and you can actually count, it's about 30 boats or so. So, very little numbers, but we have family members who would say, hey, can I borrow a boat? I still want to go at sea. They would bring them fishing, etc. So I think it's more of like, having access and the right to go at sea.
Right, okay. Thank you. So I think that's a good segue into the next question. So what does your organization intend to achieve, right? Because I think your website also talks about reclaiming the narrative, right? So what is that narrative that you want to reclaim?
So difficult your questions, Walid. Okay, so we started in 2020, and then we started as a page to just share the narrative of Pulau Semakau. During COVID, you somehow look inwards and look into what's important to you. And I was having food with my mom, and she would cook, and she would tell me all the stories about the stories behind the food, like how she used to gather certain pieces of fish, and how she got together seaport, etc. All these things I've heard from her before, but this time around I really listened. I was like, you know what? I think we need to somehow tell people that Pulau Semakau is more than landfill, and that's why we started. And from then on, we used Instagram as just a way to actually talk about the island. And also with food, we use food as a vehicle to share our narratives. Because Singaporeans love food, right? So I thought that was a low-hanging fruit. And today, I think it has grown to a few things. Orang Laut SG is now a collective. We want to work with other islanders as well to push for a little bit of advocacy as well. But I think we want to make sure that their concerns, their challenges are being heard, and we want to be able to preserve these spaces. So what Orang Laut SG has been doing for the last 3 years is that we have been working with schools to create programs, tours, and I think we've been working with other institutions as well, like NTU and NUS, to help them with research, in any capacity that we could. And we also have been dabbling with arts as well. So we wanted to recognize that some of the culture or traditions are intangible cultural heritage that should be preserved. And this is, in a way, art form. Making a boo-boo trap in its own is an art form, because it's a lost art, and not many people who have access to the sea knows how to make a boo-boo trap, for example. So moving forward, we are going to set up a non-profit. And this non-profit is going to be focused on preserving our culture, making sure that we're able to work with institutions to look into cultural preservation, and we support them in any way possible as well. I think for us is making sure that our history is not forgotten, the Orang Pulau history, because a lot of Southern Islands has been turned into something else. Petrochemical spaces has been turned into a landfill, and if you look into Jurong Island, which made up of about, I think, 13 islands or 14, all of these stories, I know that some of the researchers are doing a lot of groundwork to find out where these individuals are still living. So I think for us, it's more of like, can we be an arm to actually support and connect the community members to researchers, because we do want to preserve our history. And also on the topic of reclaiming narrative is hearing from these individuals about what the islands meant to them. Are there any sacred spaces? What kind of areas of interest that they had for the island itself through their eyes because they were the first occupants. Having this narrative from them is reclaiming this narrative. St. John's is not St. John's. St. John's is Pulau Sekijang Pelepah, Pulau Sekijang Bendera, right? So I think all these narratives are something that we need to preserve. And oral history is really as important as recorded history.
Yeah, that's fascinating, right? Because I don't know, it's because of the scientific revolution or the way that we think about oral history is always secondary to recorded history, right? When for most of human history, oral history has been an important, the primary mode of transmission of knowledge. You mentioned sacred spaces. Do you want to elaborate on that? I mean, because I know people who are connected to nature, they have a very they revere nature in ways that urban people do not, right? And you still see this even in developed countries. You see this in the more rural areas, right? There's a reverence for nature. So is that what you were talking about when you're talking about sacred spaces?
I mean, it's a little bit of a touchy subject because these places or sacred spaces are very personal to the community. Sometimes you don't even want to reveal.
Right.
They don't acknowledge it because for the fear of them being viewed as un-Islamic in a sense, right? But I think these are all beliefs that they had on the island. And sacred spaces look into places that harbor other beings and also meant something for their family.
Okay.
It could be a portal to another worldly world, to the other worldly. So, or looking into a tree that could actually grant wishes. I'm just citing some examples.
Right.
But there are secret spaces that are on the islands themselves. I think a lot of times when we look into these islands, we see them as possibly destination spots. But I think these narratives are important because, these secret spaces actually shape who they are and who they were basically, and also looking into how they respond to nature. One example I could give is the different terumbus on the island. Terumbus mean coral areas, right? Some terumbus you cannot go at a specific time because they believe that there are protectors guarding the space and you cannot fish more than you should. So it's really interesting that all of these beliefs are intangible cultural heritage that should be documented and respected as well, because in that sense, these are all sacred spaces. I think that would be one of the few things that I would love to highlight, but of course with the permission of the islanders.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So I completely agree with you about the importance of preserving narratives and history, right? But if I were to channel my typical Singaporean self, right? So what if a typical Singaporean would say, yes, I mean, that's unfortunate, but that's the price we pay for development, right? How would you respond to that? That's just a price we pay for the development, right? So people had to be moved out of their homes. I mean, it happened even on mainland, Land Reclamation Act and so on. So how would you respond to that?
I think displacement is not uniquely just for the Southern Islanders, but Orang Laut SG focuses on Southern Islands because I came from a place that is really important to me. And how I would respond is, I think every narrative is important, and we look into what's recorded on the islands themselves. Unfortunately, I would say that's not much that came from the community. So I think it's important to look, in a way, look from their perspective and how these islands are important to them, and listen to their narratives as well. If not, it'd be lost lah. For me, this is my personal journey, right? Looking into why these narratives are so important, and also hearing all of these voices, hearing about their pain and the challenges and the traumas they face because of displacement, and that holds a lot of value to me. And I could also say the same to people who are displaced on other parts of Singapore as well. It holds a lot of value, but ultimately, have we done enough to actually preserve these narratives? And and could we work better? Could we look into acknowledging that displacement happened? There are impacts of displacement, and
Right.
I think impacts of displacement doesn't only stop at the islanders themselves, but also the next generation, their grandchildren, sometimes may still live in poverty. For my grandmother who lived at Teluk Blangah, they are still living there. And, I could also say that a lot of these trickle to the grandchildren and different parts of the community as well, who are still living in poverty-stricken areas, unfortunately. But of course, there are success stories as well. They have adapted. But I don't think, they have an even playing field. So what can we do to actually address these gaps? What kind of assessments do we need to look into? Assess if displacement actually happened and these are the impacts. So that's one of the things that we want to do at Orang Laut SG as well, through our non-profit. We want to make sure that there would be areas that we can actually support these community members, be it, monetarily, be it any sort of like financial aid, or, even supporting them on the basis of education. I think a lot of them would benefit from that as well.
Could you elaborate on that, the displacement leading to second or third gen poverty? Because that's a structural issue, right?
It is a structural issue, I think. But I think I could only say on behalf of what I know, which is my immediate family members. So I think my grandparents had 10 children, and out of the 10 children, we have so many grandchildren, about I think 40, 50, but unfortunately I'm the only one who graduated with a degree. I think it speaks a lot volumes actually, because we look into their hardships. They are on survival mode, and my grandparents had to still work till like I think their 60s, I believe, and going out there catching fish. And this trickled down to people like my mom, who actually didn't have a lot of education on the island, and they actually took a lot of pride when working on the island. But when we moved to mainland Singapore, they had to take odd jobs, because of education level, and trying to educate us as good as possible. And I think they did try, but ultimately you're right, it's a structural issue as well. But I would say they didn't have the guidance, they didn't have the opportunities that others may have. And I think there were a lot of social stigmas as well that comes with displacement, when people see them as lesser, and psychologically they think that they are lesser as well, and they have suppressed identities. And of course, this would come from my personal experience. I could say very different about other community members, but from what we have been doing and also talking to who we've been talking to, I think a lot of sentiments are the same. And this comes from the many different interviews that we had with different individuals. If let's say you were still living on the island, do you think your life would have been different? There was one of the questions we asked, and I think they said, yeah, definitely they would still live on the island. They would think that they would be more comfortable on the island as compared to living in Singapore, because of the challenges they face when moving to mainland Singapore. Everything is expensive, and adapting was difficult as well. Yeah, so I would say it had some effect. Definitely the next generation could be impacted as well.
Okay, thank you so much. So you mentioned a few times that it's important to preserve the oral history and the narrative, right? So are you doing that now? Are you talking to the elders and documenting them? And can we expect like a book or something from you?
Yeah, I'm documenting them. I think I thought I thought a couple of times about publishing a book, but right now I realize that as we interview more people, there are more narratives to unearth. So it's kind of ending. I don't know where to stop.
So you're publishing books basically, not a book.
Let's start with a book first. One book, see how it goes. I
Okay.
think we want to make sure that the narratives are properly represented and the flow of things as well. I want to make sure that we start with Pulau Semakau, because that's what I know, and the people of my family knows Pulau Semakau best, and of course the people who actually live around there, which is Pulau Sekeng, Pulau Bukom, etc. We did interviewed them as well. But a lot of this Orang Lama has a long past, and we are against time, so we're trying to find and locate individuals who are willing to speak to us as well.
Right. So how do you feel when you read our textbook, right? Like Raffles founded Singapore and there were 30 Orang Laut.
Right.
When you were reading that, when you were growing up, did that ever resonate with you in a way that, I mean, for other Singaporeans, you just, oh, okay. Yeah.
To be honest, when I was growing up, I didn't even register in my head that was a thing. Whatever they were feeding us, or rather,
Right.
like what they were teaching us, we'll take it as fact, lah, right? I didn't question it. I think it's only later in my 20s that I thought about, actually, what about our narratives? What about my family's narrative? And the stories that they've been telling me, about how they were affected by konfrontasi once upon a time, how they weren't allowed to go fishing because of the curfews that were in place. What about this narrative? So I started to question about, are there alternative narratives of the Orang Pulau, Orang Laut community that hasn't been unearthed? But when I was growing up, I did face a few stigmas, but I didn't actually thought about, the education that I was being given at the point in time, because maybe I was really young, I wasn't aware. But the stigmas I faced was that I would tell them that, oh, last weekend I actually went out at sea with my grandparents, that I saw dolphins racing our boat. And no one believed me. They were like, they were like, no lah, where got Singapore, where got dolphins, sort of thing. But there's really dolphins back then lah.
Oh, so you saw dolphins quite often last time?
They are rare, but there were dolphins. Sometimes when we go out at sea, with our sampan, right? And then there will be dolphins racing our sampans. So
wow,
really fun. But this is the kind of things but people won't believe because Southern Islands are a bit far-fetched. And then that's also I realized that actually, I had to really reinforce that these are my experience and my journey with my peers, because also they were kids so I'm not sure they fully believe me as well.
Right. Oh, fascinating stuff. I actually didn't know that you could see dolphins in the wild in Singapore. But now I presume it doesn't happen anymore?
Oh, lesser, definitely. I think if you look at the Southern Islands, or rather just going to West Coast Park, you see so many ships. Definitely the water is affected. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So there is a question or comment by Professor Chia to think about how the CMIO model serves to both institutionalize difference, but also flattens and simplifies the diversity we have. And I presume in this particular case, she is talking about the diversity within the Malay category. And amongst the three categories, actually the Malays are the most homogeneous, right? But even within this homogeneous category, there's still a lot of diversity that, I mean, what you just mentioned is so fascinating. It's not the typical Malay experience, I suppose, that people would associate with what they think of when the term Malay is brought to mind. Do you want to comment on that?
I think there are a lot of subgroups, like what you mentioned, and there are of course more apparent ones. The CMIO model, it worked once upon a time when Singapore gained its independence. But I think now we need to acknowledge that there are different subgroups, and just pigeonholing these individuals just within the CMIO model is doing our community, or rather Singapore, a disservice, because there's so many different cultures to celebrate. And looking into just the Malay subgroups, right? We have the Boyanese, the Javanese, the Minangkabaus, the Orang Pulau, Orang Laut community. So I think it's really interesting that if you could actually, focus on these subgroups and their narratives and their differences and where they used to live or come from, I think that would be an interesting way to actually acknowledge that we come from a myriad of cultures and differences. It's like same but different, right? But I think what we also need to do is look into how we can actually help to preserve love. The how is very important,
right?
And moving forward. Because to be honest, a lot of the Orang Lama has long passed, and I think the things that we can actually do now is unfortunately not much. And I would really love for us to actually work with institutions, work with other groups who are also trying to preserve cultures and narratives. So I think there's many things we can actually do, but there's only so much we can do.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Right. So that's another question I had. So tangibly, how could we do this? Like, how could we retain this culture, or how could we promote the narratives? I mean, I'm sure I don't know whether you have talked to, I don't know, NHB or even NLB or all these institutions that are officially invested in all of this. Have you explored those options as well?
I think NHB has been supportive.
Okay.
We've been working. I think the first year we launched, we worked with them on Singapore Heritage Festival, and they acknowledge what we're trying to do using food as vehicle, share our narratives, and but this is more of like a more festival centric kind of approach. But of course, we look into how we can preserve. Internally as an organization, is that we need to acknowledge there are heritage spaces that needs to be protected. So moving forward, protecting these spaces means protecting our communities' right to go out at sea as well. Like West Coast Park is one of them. We acknowledge that West Coast Park is important. So what can we do to preserve them? And also looking at the Southern Islands as well. A lot of the Southern Islands now are very inaccessible except for like the main field like Kusu, St. John's, Lazarus, etc. But I think moving forward, it will be turned into a recreational space. But what can we actually do more to actually acknowledge the heritage and culture part of the islands and the islanders who used to live there? So I think for me, also looking into getting this narrative into the mainstream education, I think for us making sure that we could work with educators. So far, when we work with educators, it's very ad hoc. They would work with us because we can share a little bit more about our narratives, our family's narratives. But other than that, we hope to really curate programs that could actually be used and also shared amongst different schools at large. So I think that's one of the main goals that we have as well. Education is one way, preserving spaces is one way. Also looking into like acknowledging that there are individuals who are still practicing the island traditions. We need to support them in any ways possible. So I think some ways that they can support them is to not restrict them as much.
Right.
I think a lot of the spaces have been gazetted as protected areas. Rightly so, because some of these spaces, because of like the ecology within those areas, they are protected. But I think you need to also acknowledge that these individuals, when they go out fishing, they are not destroying nature. There's this very strong notion that because they're going to see the placing the boo traps, they are doing their recreational fishing. They are actually destroying nature. But actually, this has very low impact if you compare it to like trawling, for example.
Right.
But and this is also a cultural tradition. And how do you draw the lines between these two?
And also from what you mentioned earlier, you just mentioned it in passing. It seems like the practices of fishing that were done were done in sustainable ways. Of course, I mean it's a post hoc usage of that term. But you mentioned in your answer to my question on sacred spaces, you mentioned there are some coral areas where they are not allowed to go, and you are not allowed to fish more. You mentioned that you are not allowed to fish more than what you need or something.
Yeah, I think that's a belief basically.
Right.
So I think
so it seems like it's done in a very sustainable manner, right?
Yeah.
So there's no question of environmental degradation or something, right?
Correct. So I think what I would say is when we go out fishing, right, my grandfather always tell me that you cook enough,
Right.
take it whatever you need, leave it for the next person. Leave it for a person who will come back there tomorrow at the same spot. So this always cannot be greedy, lah. So when you're greedy, something bad will happen to you.
Right.
I believe, so you cannot take more than you should, more than you need, basically. And also, they understand the waters really well. So they would actually, when they go out fishing, what they would do is look at different terumbus or areas depending on the seasons of the wind, whether it's east wind, north wind, etc. will bring about a different sort of fish. And everything is seasonal, right? And let's say rainy season, people would actually assume that monsoon season you cannot actually fish. You can. You could actually fish for the tengiris at different parts of the island, or mostly closer to the Riau aside. So because that's actually one of the ways that they sustain themselves as well.
Have you inherited that acumen? Like, are you as familiar around the waters yourself?
My brother is, unfortunately, not me. I think I try to learn as much as possible from him, but my brother is more the experts lah in my family, and I think other than these acumens, he also trying to learn. He's also trying to learn different sort of skills, like depoisoning pufferfish, for example. So this would be a skill that is uniquely to the coastal communities in the Nusantara. So we have the people of Bajau and the Orang Laut who also knows how to do it. They cook it very different. They also have different beliefs of when you consume pufferfish, there are different warnings. So the patuas basically, you cannot drink coffee. You cannot. You have to pee before you consume it, and after, it will kill you. Things like that. So they have different set of rules when cooking pufferfish, and these kind of things we learned because we were growing up. These are the kind of things that my mom would tell me. But the skills of depoisoning, locating the poison, cooking it, I think all of these things take a lot of time. And if we do not have access to catch a pufferfish, because it's not openly sold, right? We will in time lose the ways of knowing how to remove the pufferfish poisons lah. So I think it's a chicken and egg problem. You can learn, but you've got the pufferfish to practice on, and how do you continue?
Right. That's really fascinating stuff. Thank you for that. So, is there any tangible policy change that you like to see, that you can say that, okay, Orang Laut SG has been successful, or is it more about raising awareness and or maybe it's both, right? Because you did talk about going to schools and educating younger children about the history of this important group, subset of the indigenous people in Singapore.
I think one of the things that we are trying to do is to really celebrate our culture. And one of the efforts that we're trying to focus on is to push for Islanders Day or Hari Orang Pulau. So Hari Orang Pulau, there are two objectives. One is, of course, raising awareness, and the other one is to look into like the uniqueness of the coastal communities of the Orang Pulau community in Singapore. And with that, we are pushing it next year in June, and we are trying to create a slew of programs where we're going to invite speakers, we're going to invite experts to talk about the uniqueness of the coastal communities of the Southern Islands and also the wider Nusantara. And we're also hoping to do a cross-community sharing where we try to invite, I think, the Teochews, the Hokkiens, to see whether or not the correlations or overlaps or intersections between like our communities, right? Because the Teochews actually owned a lot of the big ships once upon a time. They actually dabbled with the Orang Pulau community as well, and they became the sellers, resellers rather of the goods that were caught now. So I think we hope to unearth these cross-community stories as well. But Hari Orang Pulau is a celebration of our unique culture, and we hope to push it next year. And one of the partners we're looking at is to work with Sentosa, because we don't have access to a lot of the islands, so we want to celebrate it on an island. And I think I'm not sure if you know this, in 1970s they had Pista 5S, Sukan 5S. So Pista 5S was initiated by Othman Wok as well, the late Othman Wok, the MP. So they had Sudong, Seking, Sekijang, all the 5Ss.
Right.
They actually compete. It's like a SEA Games of sort.
Right.
So we cannot replicate them because they had jong races, there are a lot of water activities, also land activities as well. So what we will try to do is to do like perhaps a similar but land version of that, but focusing on a few parts, which is art, culture, food, heritage, etc., and also stories. It's a celebration for the islanders as well. And when I spoke to the islanders, what they wanted to do is, can you please bring the Riau Islanders to come to celebrate with us, because they have this session called Joget. Joget means dance lah. So a lot of the Southern Islands will actually go to Riau to do this Joget thing. Even today, when they have a Joget, right, this activity, they will actually invite a few coastal community bands to perform. So we are hoping to do that.
What type of Joget is it?
Um, I think there is what are joget of it? Oh my god. Joget
Lambak.
lambak basically.
Okay, joget lambak.
Joget
Yeah,
lambak,
yeah. So
right.
everybody joget together, yeah, dancing
Hmm.
together. Yeah. Okay,
Joget
okay.
lambak.
Yeah, I attended a wedding once in Malaysia where there was joget lambak. Yeah. Um. So fascinating. So this is in June next year. How many
Correct.
people in your organization? It seems like you guys are doing a lot of things.
Yeah, crazy,
How can you?
right?
How many people are doing all of these things?
I think right now we are setting up our non-profit. So I think with that we are trying to get more volunteers. So we are mostly volunteer run. Primarily, we have about a group of less than 5 individuals. Uh,
Wow.
but these are all ad hoc lah, because we are still a collective. But once we have a non-profit and we have funding, we hope to actually hire people on a full-time basis lah. Yeah.
So interviews, visit schools, write a book, organize
That's not
Orang Pulau Day.
that's on my to-do list. But yeah, if anyone wants to help, let me know.
Oh, the book is not on your to-do
But
list yet, is it?
it's on my to-do
Oh, it
list.
is. Oh, it is.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Right, right, right. So, Sentosa, it's an interesting choice, right? Wouldn't you say Sentosa it represents the opposite of what the Orang Pulau stands for or way of life? I mean, it's a complete reversal of what it's supposed to be like, right?
I would say I take what we can get at this point, because if you look at what we have, a lot of it has changed from. And Sentosa, there are some parts that are still original and not reclaimed. And also, it was one of the Southern Islands as well. So we need to acknowledge that it was one of the Southern Islands. If it's not Sentosa, it could also be St. John's or Lazarus. But then we look into access, because a lot of these old individuals, right, when they go to these islands, it's a bit hard for them to travel. So we also need to take that in consideration. But one thing that we wanted to also consider is actually West Coast Park, to have an event there at West Coast Park, because the community members are still there. But then it looks into the idea of cost, because we have to create structures and the cost is going to be so crazy. So we want to make sure that everything is low in cost, making sure everyone have access to it. So it's going to be a free event where our main focus is to educate, raise awareness, and celebrate our culture. So and Sentosa Development Group or corporation, I think they have been quite supportive of the idea, and I think they wanted to also work with us on this. But of course, our objective is to really we need to focus on the Southern Islands narrative lah. We have a lot of say in the content that goes out. So I think it's a win for us, because we have the space, and we are also partnering with Sentosa, who also wants to acknowledge that islander history as well. So I think, yeah, a lot of it have been reclaimed, fake beaches and stuff like that. But what can we do, Walid?
Right, yeah. It's happened already. So it's great
Correct.
that they want to acknowledge it, right? I
Mm.
mean, I didn't know that, but that's fantastic, right? That's progress, I suppose. So you said you only started doing this in 2020, 2021
2020,
during COVID,
2020 during COVID, yeah.
right? And within 3 years, it has become, I won't say like huge, but it becomes significant enough for people to know about it, right?
Yeah, I think thankfully, individuals are supporting us. They want to hear our narrative, and because of that, we also have other islanders or descendants who came up to us to say that we're from this island, which is really interesting for us. So because of that, we actually started this event called Panggilan Anak Pulau, where we work with other descendants to actually push for a day to reclaim our narrative. That happened in July this year, where we had an event at the projector, and that's why we announced that we want to push for Islanders Day next year lah. So we want to keep up this momentum. We want to work with more Islanders, and just acknowledge that Islander culture can still remain and be celebrated. So yeah, in 3 years it's crazy, a short amount of time, so I'm counting my blessings. But we want to keep up the momentum, make sure that we're able to, exist in future as well, because a lot of spaces are turning into different things, as you know. So I look forward to what the Forward SG plan gonna be like in future.
Right, right, right. And it has to incorporate these different voices and narratives, right? And it's not like you are doing anything super controversial or what. I think it is the way you are going about it is also, I think it's very legal, but also I think it's non-confrontational, non-controversial. So when you were talking about gathering all the other anak pulau, right? What is your sense amongst the younger ones? Is there that similar desire on your part? I mean, your passion. I mean, it's clear, it's palpable. But do you see this amongst the others as well, or is it, oh yeah, it's our history, but you know, if we know it, we know it. If not, it's fine. We don't lose anything.
I think definitely there will be detachment because they didn't access to the islands like how I did when I was younger. But I think there is a strong sense of trying to reclaim their identity. The younger individuals, I think we spoke to a few who were descendants of Pulau Sudong, and they mentioned that, oh, I didn't know this until my mom, which is Asnida Daud, actually talk about the islands and started advocating for it. So I think a lot of the descendants who are trying to push for it, they somehow have a positive impact on the younger generation, thankfully. And you know, there are different people doing great work, and I think we have people from Pulau Brani, like the descendants who actually published a book on Pulau Brani as well. You know, they started this like SG50 many years ago. And you know, we try to look into like what kind of things that have been done, and I think they are also part of SG50 group. SG50, there was a group that actually did SG Nation, is it? Island Nation, sorry, Island Nation. Yeah, they documented a lot of Islanders' history, and there was the work of Sakura Zainal, I believe, and his peers from NTU. That was a really great project because my grandmother and my uncle was interviewed. I didn't know until like, you know, a couple of years back. Yeah, so I think there are really good things that have been put out there, but for us, it's making sure that the momentum stays on. I wouldn't say that, you know, nothing has been done. I think that a lot of things have been done previously by different groups of people, even, you know, looking into what Dr. Vivian Wee has done. I think she did a lot of work trying to connect the Orang Laut of Riau to the Southern Islands as well. And I think she also stayed at, I believe she did some research on Pulau Serking,
Right.
which I thought was really great. Yeah, I think many great things have been done. For now, we just hope to work with you know, these individuals who have done a bit of work on their end and try to collate everything together and make sure that we are fronting it as a movement.
So final question to you, Firdaus. If there is one thing that you want Singaporeans to know about either your movement or about the Orang Pulau, the Southerners, what would it be? Just one main thrust.
What would it be? I would say there would be more to just the name of the pulau that they know. I think we need to unearth these stories, and the Southern Islands are not barren land. There used to be a lot of livelihood and traditions that were in place. So I would encourage them to find out more, question where these people went, what kind of stories they used to have. And yeah, I think that's what I want people to know, you know, questioning whether or not Sentosa was Sentosa.
Lazarus Island, right? Even the
Yeah.
name is already like, huh, that doesn't sound
Yeah.
doesn't sound very Singapore. Okay, thank you so much, Firdaus. I really wish your project well, and I mean, hopefully in June when the Islanders Day thing happens, and we'll have you and other Islanders on as well again, and I'll be happy to support the initiative in whatever way I can. But really, all the best. And when can we look forward to the book? No pressure. This is a
The last
soft
time-
launch, right?
The last time I gave a date, then it didn't happen. So I can't give.
But next couple of years, are you within the next couple of years?
Yeah,
Okay.
for like 2 years already. So I think you know, hopefully soon now.
Okay. Thank you so much, Firdaus.
Thank you, Walid, for having
Good night.
me. Thank
No
you,
problem.
everyone.
Bye bye.